In the year 1996, id Software shook the world of gaming with Quake. Now, 25 years after its release, one of the most important and influential first-person shooters ever has made its glorious return. Remastered for modern hardware and chock full of content, old and new. But does this shiny new version preserve the glory of this dark classic, or should we just stick to the source ports? What's up, Rangers? I'm Kirk, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the 25th anniversary remaster of Quake. But before we get fragging, if you're new here and you're digging what you're seeing, please consider subscribing and liking to help support this channel. Alrighty, prepare to enter the Slipgate. Developed by the Remaster Masters at Nightdive Studios, their approach to this new version of Quake is in line with their other remastering efforts. Keep the original look and feel of the game intact, fix what only needs fixing, and bring in a host of quality of life improvements expected for a contemporary gaming experience, making for software that both revives and archives. This remaster of Quake features enhanced graphics, online multiplayer with crossplay and split-screen support, and includes not only the original 4 episodes of Quake, but its 2 expansion packs, along with 2 additional ones developed by Machine Games. The first being Dimension of the Past, which they developed for Quake's 20th anniversary, and the brand spankin' new Dimension of the Machine, which was developed for this 25th anniversary. I wonder what they'll do for the 30th. A big thing to note is that if you already own Quake on Steam, you will receive this update for free. Also, and this is important, you will still have the option to boot up the original version and use its files, like for a source port or something. Now, one of these days, I do plan to do a more in-depth video on Quake and all of its earth-shattering aspects, but for this video, I'm just going to be focusing on this new version. I'll give a rundown of why Quake is so awesome for the newcomers, detail the new graphical enhancements, and then give my thoughts on the new add-on content, Dimension of the Machine. Quake was originally released back in 1996 for the personal computer, and yeah, it was kind of a big deal. Developed by id Software as a spiritual follow-up to their insanely influential Doom games, Quake was not the first fully 3D first-person shooter, but it set the standard for how they should be made. Its design and technology directly influenced many of the prominent shooters of the late 90s and early 2000s, and certainly the current wave of retro indie shooters we enjoy today. The accolades don't end there though, not even close. Quake was a major catalyst in the development of video graphics technology. It was a key game in popularizing speedrunning, esports, machinima, and modding. In fact, classics like Team Fortress and Counter-Strike both have their roots in the Quake modding scene. And let's not forget the impact of the Quake engine and its successors, which were licensed to many developers who used them and modified them for numerous titles. If you've never looked at the Quake engine family tree, I recommend you do. It's eye-opening. Quake is a game I like more and more every time I play it. To me, it's timeless. Sure, there's some things about it that show some age. This is a 25-year-old game after all, but even 25 years on, it remains tight, fun, and playable. To me, it's like a theme park ride, a haunted house mixed with a roller coaster. Every mission is full of excitement and surprises, enemies coming at you from every direction, and booby traps around every corner. There's rarely a dull moment in Quake. Its bouncy, responsive movement system, which was a trailblazer for the genre, still feels amazing to control, if not a hair on the slidey side. And the combat, while not quite as impactful compared to recent retro shooters, still satisfies. There's nothing quite like splatting an enemy with a face full of buckshot or jibbing a monster with a flurry of rockets. Ugh, fucking vor. And we can't forget the level design. To take advantage of its, for the time, advanced movement system, the wizards at id built levels that emphasized verticality and platforming, giving players a greater challenge to not only their reflexes, but spatial awareness. And its dark art style, a mishmash of themes like medieval fantasy and Lovecraft, is a look I consider iconic, and I know I'm not the only one that wants id, or whoever might take over the Quake franchise, to bring back. It's one of those games that never gets old to me. Every time I venture through the slipgate, I always find myself totally immersed. There are certainly things I dislike about it. The main campaign features 2 very underwhelming boss fights, and there's a few members of the intense enemy roster I absolutely despise, like the blobby spawns, or as I like to call them, the smegma of Satan. They bop around the environment sporadically, making them hard to hit, and if they connect with you, they'll explode, which can one-shot you. I despise them, easily one of my least favorite FPS enemies. But those annoyances hardly tarnish my love for this game, and I'm happy to say playing through this remaster has been a treat. This new version plays beautifully. As far as I can tell, nothing has been changed gameplay-wise. Weapons, enemies, and movement behave and feel as they should. However, there are some simple but appreciated quality of life improvements, like the option for a minimal HUD and a level select for all of the included content. The biggest change to this version I found though was in the nightmare difficulty, where the player's maximum health, non-supercharged, is now limited to 50 instead of 100. And I'm pretty sure some of the enemies have been toned down in Nightmare 2. The ogres, for example, who in older Nightmare versions would spam their grenades, are less intense in this version. I don't necessarily mind these tweaks, but I wish there was the option to play the original version of Nightmare, simply for preservation purposes. Like the recent Doom and Doom 2 remasters, there's support for add-ons, the first being the N64 version of the game, which is unique for its distinct lighting and soundtrack by Aubrey Hodges. Id should be populating this more in the future, hopefully with fan-favorite Quake mods like Arcane Dimensions. Although, between you and me, if you're interested in Quake mods, you're probably still better off playing them through a source port. One fun thing about this remaster is that it was also released for the consoles, and you bet your leapin' fiends I downloaded both the PS4 and Switch versions. Look, I have Doom on every system I own, I don't see why Quake should be any different. Both these versions are pretty much identical to the PC release in terms of features, content, and graphics. A couple things I appreciate about the console versions is that the jumping has been mapped to the left trigger, making it so players will have an easier time getting their bunny hops in. And a weapon wheel has been added, which is very similar to the ones found in Doom 2016 and Eternal. The weapon wheel is also present in the PC version, but we all know the console players are the ones who will be using it. The console versions also feature gyroscopic aim, specifically on the PS4 and Switch versions. Not my cup of tea, but I know Switch FPS fans really appreciate this feature when playing in handheld mode. Yeah, I'm not good with it. Now, while the PlayStation 4 version played like butter, I did notice some frame dips on the Switch version. Nothing extreme to where it ruined my fun, but it is something to note. Of course, it's not Quake without multiplayer, and not only does this remaster feature online crossplay deathmatch with up to 8 players, there's also local split screen on all systems, and 4-player co-op, both online and local for the campaign. So I have to admit, I don't have a lot of Quake multiplayer experience, so I'm not really in a position to say how well the multiplayer translated to this remaster. I can definitely say that Quake multiplayer is madness and I'm terrible at it. Also doesn't help that my current internet situation is modest, but it does make for some manic fun. I also got a little bit of co-op time, which was a lot of fun, but also a lot of chaos. Matchmaking posed few issues for me. I was able to get in the matches fairly quickly, although there were a couple slow times and a few disconnections. So far, I've seen positive feedback to the multiplayer online, but I'd love to hear your take on it in the comments if you have some. Alrighty, let's talk about presentation. Now, to the Quake hardcore, playing an updated version of this game is nothing new. For years now, fans have been able to enjoy Quake through a variety of fan-made source ports, which not only got Quake running on modern operating systems, but also implemented many of the graphical enhancements found in this remaster. To state the obvious, what makes this remaster so exciting is now these enhancements can be enjoyed in an official version of the game. However, I do think it's important to acknowledge the contributions of the developers of these source ports. They did set the standard for how Quake should be remastered. Included in this remaster is support for higher resolutions like 4K, anti-aliasing, depth of field effects, dynamic shadows, ambient occlusion, and color light maps. Lighting is one of the easiest improvements to spot. The colored lighting, while subtle, does add a little extra character to these classic maps. And the dynamic shadows look awesome. I particularly enjoyed seeing the splash of enemy shadows from the flash of gunfire. Motion blur has been added, which I typically prefer to keep off as the effect tends to give me a headache, but I played through a level here with it on so you can see how it looks, and the implementation does look nice and smooth. Textures, as far as I can tell, have been left intact. Although, take that with a grain of salt, there's always a chance something was redrawn or improved and I simply missed it. I don't mind them being left alone. Personally, I think Quake's crispy old textures still look great, and in my opinion, trying to redraw them to be more detailed or high definition runs the risk of losing the original game's dark, rusty, oppressive atmosphere. However, there is the option for texture smoothing if you're not a fan of the pixelated look. And of course, if you're a purist, you have the option to turn all of this off and play the game looking pretty much like the original. Where you can see the biggest improvements is in the models for the monsters, which I feel Nightdive absolutely nailed. Here we have the remaster model for the grenade launching ogre. And now here's the original ogre model. Yeah, that's a pretty substantial difference. More geometry and detail has been added along with more frames of animation, but it still sticks closely to the original look of the monster. In fact, you might notice the textures between the two are almost identical, and certain details that were hard to see in the original, like the ogre's protruding fangs, are now easier to see with the updated model. The Death Knight is another fine example, his shoulder spikes sitting on his frame a lot more naturally compared to the original model. And look at the Shambler, his full mouth of teeth have been rendered, and he remains just as nightmare-inducing as ever. A big improvement is model interpolation, which is something that has been prominent in the source ports. Model interpolation is basically when frames are created in between two animation points of a character model, creating the effect of smooth movement. This was not present in the original versions of Quake, and so models would animate choppily, as better seen here with our crucified zombie. But now with model interpolation included, the animation is much smoother and not distracting. And with the enhanced models turned on, it looks even better. Weapon models have also seen similar enhancements. As iconic as they are, the weapon models for the original Quake have not aged well over the years. When we look at them closely, we can see some funky, uneven geometry and texturing that looks a little off. With the new models though, we see that these issues have been corrected. And further subtle detail has been added. Like when we look at the grenade launcher, we can see divots added to the model. Or are those just a part of the texture? Either way, it still looks a lot better. Audio is a big highlight. All of the sound effects have been cleaned up and play back at higher quality, and they sound so much better. Take a listen. And I am very pleased to say that the original soundtrack by Trent Reznor, you know, of Nine Inch Nails fame, is here and intact. This is a very good thing, as the music was not available in digital versions of Quake before this remaster, and fans had to resort to other means to restore the music. Plus, how badass was it that he even scored this game in the first place? I really hope he comes back to compose a sequel someday. So far, I've been very positive on all this, but I do have my gripes. I appreciate that we now have the option to play with a minimal HUD, but I really wish the HUD elements themselves were redrawn for higher resolutions. It's the original assets and they look pixelated and messy. I really wish I had the option to switch to something cleaner. Also, it would be great if I could change the crosshair. I'm not a fan of this chunky cross with a drop shadow. I want to be able to change it to a dot, because that's my preference, and be able to change the size and color. This is something that was present in the source ports. Whenever I would fall from a tall height, the weapon model on screen would spaz out. This was an issue not present in the source ports. Other bugs I found occurred at startup. Sometimes the game would outright crash after the startup logos, which wasn't ideal, and one time I booted up the game and none of the textures loaded for the demo background, which was strange. But the most common bug came from just loading a game. For whatever reason, when I booted up the game and loaded up a save, it would load and then just bump me back to the demo screen. And then when I tried a second time, it would succeed. This happened every time I played, and the consistency of it was, well, annoying, but also kind of funny. I know these issues have been bugging other players too, so hopefully we'll get some patches sooner than later. Otherwise, can't say I have many other complaints. Ha! Finally, we have arrived at Dimension of the Machine, the new episode developed by Wolfenstein dev Machine Games. This is a meaty expansion consisting of 5 worlds, each featuring 2 missions, making for 10 missions total, with an 11th being the final boss map. And you better believe there's some secret ones hidden in here as well. The goal is to collect the arcane rune from each world, after which the ranger can go after the big bad evildoer of the episode and get himself back to his home dimension. The first thing to note here is how gorgeous these maps are. Machine Games' previous episode, Dimension of the Past, was a fine looking add-on as well, but stuck close to the art style and aesthetics of the original Quake campaign. But here, you can tell this team wanted to flex their Quake mapping muscle. The worlds constructed here follow the typical Quake themes, but presents a new spin on them. Some maps are cold and industrial, infernal places of mechanical madness, polluted and unfeeling. Some ancient places of ruin, once grand and beautiful, now crumbling shells of their former selves, and others mysterious and otherworldly, a meeting of Lovecraft and dark sci-fi. The amount of detail put into these maps is jaw-dropping, and a testament to the magic this aged engine can still pull off. Well, with a little modern help. Plus, I really dug seeing some of these maps set in warm daylight. A nice change of pace from Quake's typical darkness. And playing them, I got the sense that Machine wasn't so much trying to build pretty maps, but rather create worlds that feel more tangible to the Quake player. There's a sense of history to these places, like there is a story to glean from these halls of wood, stone, and metal. Not at all surprising, as Machine Games tends to emphasize story and world building in their games. If I had any complaints, it's that the stonemason maps weren't quite as visually charming as the others, reminding me of fighting in a shipping warehouse or something. Now, while these maps may look fancier, they're still Quake maps through and through. Roller coaster rides of combat, surprises and dangers around every corner, with perhaps more of an emphasis on switch-based puzzles. And there's some map design here meant to trip up the experienced Quake player, sometimes literally, like this circular room here with uneven flooring that the player can easily get caught on. Throw a shambler in there and you better hope your bunny hopping skills are up to the task. There's a nice variety of combat scenarios in this add-on, and what I appreciate is that each were designed to bring out the best, or maybe worst, in your enemies. A really simple but effective example being the first section of the first map, fighting up a hill of soldiers and dogs, all the while a lone ogre on a bridge above rains down grenades. A simple thing that brings a lot of spice to the scenario. I would definitely say Dimension of the Machine is tougher than the main Quake campaign, but not by much. A Quake vet will be able to handle it just fine, and I don't think it will be insurmountable for a newer player. That being said, there are some mean difficulty spikes in this game that got me sweating. Like this arena fight with a bunch of Vor stationed in the corners and a damn Shambler hunting you down. Actually, now that I think about it, a little Vor heavy in this expansion, more than I'd like, and I'll be honest, I was a little pissed to see the spawns. Overall though, I'm really impressed by the work here by Machine Games, and I think this is a great addition to the Quake canon. Perhaps it will make some id fans comfortable with the idea of the developer helming a future Quake sequel. All in all, I think Nightdive has done some quality work with this remaster. They've really treated this classic with the respect it deserves. Plus, Dimension of the Machine is a gorgeous and thoroughly entertaining addition to what is already a meaty hunk of content. I can't claim this will make all Quake fans happy. There's certainly some tweaks and additions that can be made to this remaster, but I do think this will make most Quake fans happy. And for someone who hasn't played this game in 5, 10, 20 years maybe, this is a great excuse to re-experience this classic. But what really excites me is the chance for the younger generation to discover this game. I can't stress this enough. If you're someone who is into the current retro shooter renaissance and hasn't played Quake, you owe it to yourself to play this remaster. And if you haven't played Quake but have played the newer Doom games, 2016 and Eternal, I also recommend you take the pilgrimage. The newer Dooms take after Quake a lot more than you'd think, and it will make for a pleasant surprise. But what do you think of the Quake Remaster? Did Nightdive nail it, or is this just another Bethesda disappointment? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe, like, and ring the bell for future uploads. It's a couple clicks for you, but a massive help for this channel. And be sure to come say hi in the Kirk Collects Discord linked below. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.